So, hello to everyone. I think it's time to start the event. Welcome to our new tutorial. This is already the 9th tutorial in the FAIRmat series, and we also had these tutorials before when it was just Nomad. This time we want to talk about Nomad plugins. But you know, we use the occasion of the tutorials to always show you the latest and newest things. And give you some instruction on how to try out the new features and stuff like this. And with the plugins, we are particularly excited because this hopefully gives you the tools to build the next features yourself. Let me check my slides here. I think I'm on the wrong one. I wanted to start somewhere else. I'm Markus Scheidgen. I'm here with Lauri Imanen, Amir Golpava, and Alvin Ladines. They will present later on example plugins for you. But nevertheless, the stuff that we are showing here to you is done by a large number of people, by the whole FAIRmat project, the Nomad project, and external contributors. I also want to thank our Area F team for organizing or helping us to have this event here. So what do we want to do today? So this is our agenda. We split it up into little pieces, separate talks. In the beginning, I want to talk a little bit introductory. What is Nomad? What are Nomad plugins? How do they work? Why do we need them? And so on. And then I want to show you a little technical demonstration in how to develop these plugins. What do you need to do? How to run them? How to install them? And so on and so forth. But this will be very basic, but it will just be hello world example just to get started. And then we have a series of examples that are a little bit more realistic, that could be grounded in some real use cases, right? So Lauri will tell you how to create a Python schema with normalized functions using our plugin mechanism. Amir will talk about doing some parsing of tabular files. And Alvin will give an example for what is when you have a text-based file format, how can you build a parser for this? And then our parser mechanism, what we have at the moment, is fully functional, right? You can develop plugins, you can use your plugins in your Oasis, for example, but there is supposed to be more in the future. And then in the end, I want to give a short outlook of what other plugin types we are thinking of, how do we want to build the ecosystem that the community can use to produce plugins and share plugins and so on and so forth. I added a little bit of timing here to the talks, that these are not really what we are striving for, that rough estimates, right? All in all, I think the event is planned for 3 hours, and we will, depending on your questions, we'll fill the time. We maybe do a 5-minute bio break or something like this after Lauri's talk. But otherwise, the models will basically be that we give a presentation. After each presentation, we have a small discussion. You can use the chat during the presentations to already write your questions, and then after the presentation, we can go through these questions, and then of course you can also already ask your questions then. Everything we do here today is recorded. I hope you all got the notification when you entered the room, and video recording, also the slides and the source code that we have here, and all other things that are necessary to actually follow the things that we explained today will be published shortly after the tutorial, and you will get an email with when everything is ready. Yeah, and without further ado, I would like to jump into the first presentation, which is about what are Nomad plugins, the introductory talk basically. Let's start by looking at Nomad itself. If you haven't noticed, we have a new webpage. This is what our new webpage looks like. And this new webpage also now has a representation for the Nomad Oasis, right? You know the idea that you can take the Nomad software, run it in your institute, and organize your data locally. And especially with the Nomad Oasis, plugins are something that people are asking for, right? Because you want to connect all the different instruments and systems that you have in your lab, various data formats and so on, workflows. And Nomad might not necessarily already have this, right? So you might want to add little bits and pieces. And this is one reason, these kind of customizations, why we need a plugin mechanism as one special form of customization. And then you hopefully all know Nomad, like the things that you can do. For example, you can explore existing data, which basically works because we are not just hosting files. We are really looking into files and extracting all kinds of metadata that we then, for example, use for our search interface, or for these kind of apps that allow you to explore data. Or if you look at individual data entries, we can show all kinds of things. But everything that you see in the UI in the end is grounded in structured data that we somehow need to acquire, right? So every time you upload a file or you edit your ELN or whatever, Nomad is taking this data and putting it into a structured form. And of course, there's only certain things that Nomad supports in terms of different data types and whatnot. And one reason for having plugins is that you want to extend the available data structures that you can show in Nomad. And then, of course, also you want to put in parsers and whatnot to be able to convert the different file formats that you have into these data structures. Here, this view is where we are looking into an individual data entry, and we see the structured data inside. Right here, the example of an electronic structure code simulation, where we typically have like this entry divided into, there's the run of the simulation, there's a system that was simulated, there are certain atoms in the system, and so forth, and so on and so forth. And this is basically the data structure is governed by a schema behind it, and this is one of the things that you will be able to add to Nomad, a Python schema with the plugin mechanism. And the other part that we will talk about in this presentation is adding parsers to Nomad that allow you to extract this information, for example, from your code output files or from your experimental file description that comes out of an, I don't know, a characterization instrument or whatever. And then also we have this ELN functionality in Nomad that allows you to, according to your schema, enter structured data, right? Where basically the viewer is turned into an editor, and now you can input all kinds of data. And these ELNs only make sense if you are able to modify what the schema looks like, what the ELN looks like. And in the past, we already showed you what you can do with what we call YAML schema, like a way of providing a schema by just uploading it. But this has certain limitations, right? For example, what you see here, we have like these kind of plots in here, right? Where we basically take some data, we parse it, and then we show a plot and stuff like this. So it's not just about entering strings and numbers. There is something happening on the server when you save your ELN, right? There are some certain processing steps that can be attached to your schema. And this is why sometimes it's necessary to write a Python schema. It gives you more power over your data, because your Python schema can have actual processing step in them that take your data, do something with it, create new data, associate data with each other, and so on and so forth. And all these kinds of things you can later do with the plugins. Okay, so that's a little bit of motivation, or where in Nomad you could find yourself and where you wanted to provide plugins. In order to understand how everything works, it's a little bit necessary to look under the hood. You hopefully have seen the slides several times. That is one of the standard ones, right? It explains the core loop of how Nomad works, right? It's about uploading files, right? There's files that you can put into the system, and then every file Nomad looks at, right? And when it recognizes the file format, it's doing processing on the file. It's running a parser that takes the information from the file and populates it into an instantiation of our schema. And this is a very important step, where we turn basically files that are somewhat opaque into actual structured data that we can do something with, right? That we can put up in the UI, that we can allow you to access via API, that you can run analysis on, and so on and so forth. And this processing step is basically where we wanna jump into with our plugins, where we want to allow you to support new file formats, to support new data structures. Okay, another piece of background information, data and schemas, as you have seen, are very important to us, or they will be also important to understand when you want to write plugins. So they're a little bit of an introductory example. A schema, first of all, is a conceptual model of a data structure. Right here, for example, if you think about a sample, for example, that you might want to characterize with a chemical formula or something. you might think of a schema class, and then it has a property called a formula, and the type of the formula is typically a string. And then you want to compose your sample or the composition of your sample, maybe of certain things. And here in Nomad, we can have this idea of subsections. So for example, we can connect our sample with a number of elements. And then for elements, we can have, again, properties like the label of an element, and then certain things from the periodic table, maybe like the density. And then we can attach units to it, and so on and so forth. And of course, in order to make Nomad understand this conceptual model, we have to write it down somehow. And one way are the YAML schemas that we have presented in prior tutorials. And now the other method, what you then can do with plugins, is the Python schema, where we basically write down the structure in Python classes, right? So Nomad provides you a little bit of a library where all these kind of things like the base class here and these quantity and stuff like this come from. And with this library, you can define these data structures in this way. So you basically say, okay, this is my element class, and these are the properties of my elements. And if you compare this to this picture here, basically just written down the information, right? I say label is a quantity of type string, density is a quantity of type float, and it has a unit attached to it, and so on and so forth, right? And for sample, it's the same thing. We say, okay, sample is also a class or a section, how we say it in normal jargon, and then it has properties like the formula of type string, and then the elements, which is a subsection where we basically say the sample consists of certain elements. And then we reference this other class here and say, okay, one sample can contain multiple elements. And the new thing, or the thing that you can do with the Python schemas that you could not do in the YAML schemas are these normalized functions. So the idea is when we instantiate the schema, that we can call these functions, or the normal processing can call these functions, and then in these functions you can define certain processing steps that are supposed to happen with your data. So for example, you might have some utility function that allows you to construct the formula from all the elements that are given to the sample, right? So for example, we could say we assign the formula from whatever our function provides us based on the element labels that are within the sample. And then of course a schema something needs to be done with the schema, right? And we can instantiate the schema then also within Python, right? And this is basically what parsers are doing. They're looking at files, they extract information from the file, and then they're instantiating an existing schema. And here you see we basically take the classes that are defined here and we create objects out of them, right? So for example, we say, I want to now have a specific element for hydrogen created. So I say the label is H, and then maybe have some utility function, whatever, that gets me the data from the periodic table. I just wanted to have a concise example here. You can imagine different ways of getting to these numbers and putting them here. So we could instantiate the schema to create a hydrogen object, an oxygen object. Then we can create a sample, and then we say, okay, the sample consists of these elements, 1 hydrogen, 2 oxygen. I think that's wrong, right? It's 2 hydrogen and 1 oxygen. But I guess you see my point here. Yeah, and then there's the last animation step here. Once we have instantiated the schema, of course, it's living as Python objects, but we can then serialize the data to store them in JSON, in YAML, and all kinds of different flavors. And this is then the final step of the processing, right? The parser read the text, read some input file, was parsing it, creating an instance of the schema, and then writing it down as structured data. And then this example would look like something like this. We have our sample here. It has the formula H2O, which was automatically generated through this normalized function here, based on the element information that are attached to the sample. So that was a very, very basic example of how schemas work and how you instantiate schemas. And then later on in the talks of Laurie, Amir, and Alvin, you will see more details on how to do this with concrete examples. So one more slide, just to give you some background information. When we talk about Nomad, we think about certain roles that people have, just to make it easier to talk about stuff. So when we think about Nomad or Nomad Oasis, there is the user. This is the person that uses Nomad, that logs into Nomad, uploads data, and so on and so forth. Then we have the Nomad developer. This is people like us who are part of the project and that continue to develop the Nomad software. And then we have the plugin developer, right, which is not necessarily us. It can be everybody, outside people, and so on, that basically use the plugin mechanism to create additional features for Nomad. And then we have the Nomad administrator. This is the person who runs Nomad. Yeah. So if you think about your institute and you have someone who maintains an Oasis, that would be the Oasis administrator. And later on, we will see that the administrator is the one that is deciding what plugins are in my Oasis and what plugins aren't in my Oasis. Okay, so that was a little bit of useful background information. Now let's really talk about plugins. Right. Of course, we all know plugins usually mean that we want to extend an existing platform, plug into the platform. These are the typical metaphors that you find in slides like this on the internet. But what are concrete use cases, right? Why would I need to write a plugin? And we came up with 3 typical ones. So for example, imagine you're already using Nomad ELNs, for example, and you do this based on the custom schemas in YAML format that you have learned about in one of the prior tutorials. But when you use your ELN, you have lots of repetitive editing steps, and you could imagine that some of the stuff could be automatized, right? So, for example, every time you mention a user or something like this, and then you have to also give the affiliation and their full name and the email address and all these kind of things. Well, it's imaginable that this kind of stuff is automated, right? Or every time you create an experiment, you also create a certain amount of things based on some other data that's already available. For example, you have 10 steps in your experiment of a certain kind. So the person enters 10, and then you want to click a button, and then basically 10 of these steps are pre-created so that the person only has to fill out the additional information that is necessary and doesn't necessarily has to create 10 of these steps. And there are all kinds of things possible that you could do with normalized functions. And in Lauri's talk, we will focus on this, and he will show you how to do this. Another example could be you're using Nomad ELNs and you are a user of our tabular parser. So you have lots of CSV files and Excel files and stuff like this that you want to get into Nomad, and it has worked fine so far for you. But now you have some Excel files that are a little bit more complex, where you have nested cells and all kinds of nasty stuff. And our descriptive predefined kind of parser thingy isn't powerful enough anymore. And then plugins give you an opportunity to create your own Excel parsers, and Amir will show you how to do that. And then the last one is, imagine you are based in computational material science and you are doing some kind of novel workflow system that you have developed, or a new code that you have to develop that produces some structured results, and Nomad does not yet understand it, and you want to build and the Nomad support it can use Nomad for analysis and whatnot. Then you can write your own parser with the plugin mechanism, and Alvin will show how to do that. So what is a plugin technically? So we already talked about the different parsers and schemas and whatnot and what you can do with it. But what is it technically? So technically, a plugin is a piece of Python code that somehow runs in the Nomad application and is used during the processing of data. And that makes it a little bit different to other things like the YAML schemas, for example. The Nomad administrators are the people that decide whether a plugin is used and what plugins are used, and they have to decide this before Nomad is run, right? So plugins is something that is added to the system during the startup of Nomad. It's not added during the development, and it's not added later on, right? So it's really the Oasis administrator that can decide, I want to have this feature, I want to have that feature, and then they configure the Oasis accordingly, and then these plugins are in the system. But the Nomad plugins can be developed independently of Nomad, of any Oasis. We will show you the tools. We try to lower the hurdles as much as possible and make it easy to basically create a plugin, test a plugin, and so on and so forth. There are a few examples what a plugin is, what is not a plugin. The aforementioned YAML schemas, they are not a plugin. They are uploaded by users. Everybody can create one. There are no limitations to it, but you can't really add any logic to the processing, right? So they are not a plugin. Python schemas that basically are a plugin. The tabular parser that we already have technically is not yet a plugin, right? It's just a part of the Nomad image. So there's no way for you to modify it, right? The existing parsers, they are basically determined by us. We put them into the Nomad image that is distributed, and then you are stuck with it. So they are not yet plugins, right? And yeah, there are a few other examples, but I think you get the point, right? We have certain customizations, and the plugin mechanism is basically one way of providing customizations, and we need to use plugins every time we actually want to add Python code to our processing. And why does it need to be so separate? Yeah, eventually this Python code is run on the server and is contributing to the processing. And this is done in a way that it's not run in a sandbox. It's not like a Jupyter notebook, for example, that runs in an isolated container, or it's not like a piece of JavaScript that runs in your user's browser. It really runs in the Oasis in Nomad. And from this standpoint, the plugin code can see quite a lot of things and can do quite a lot of things. So plugins need to be trusted, right? And thereby someone who has the authority needs to decide whether a plugin is safe to use or not. And this is where the Oasis administrator comes in. And he's basically deciding, okay, we use this plugin, we don't use that plugin. And this is also the reason why we can't let users upload plugins, right? Because it would open the system to certain things. Okay, now my last slide for the first segment. How do we, what is necessary to develop a plugin? So we try to make the process as simple as possible. We basically provide example template projects, little Hello World projects on GitHub that you can fork and then clone. With them comes the instruction to install everything that is necessary, which is just the Nomad Lab PyPy package. So you have to install this one in your local Python environment. And then you have everything necessary to run your plugin and to test your plugin. And then you can start developing, changing the source code, the little Hello World source code that we have extended tests and so on and so forth. And then later on, we also show how to configure your plugin in your Oasis. So that you can really use your plugin in an actual real life scenario. So these are the steps. And in the next part of the tutorial, in the next presentation, I want to actually show how to do this, and we will try it out step by step. But before we do this, I wanted to ask if you have any questions so far. Let me check if there's something in chat. Otherwise, if you have a question you want to ask it, just shoot away. Just unmute yourself. I think you are able to do that. And give me your question. I'm pretty sure the next sections will trigger more questions. This was just the introductory talk, and I hope you're all eager to see how it's really working. So if there are no questions, I will just go straight into the next presentation, or the actual demonstration. I split this into two halves. First, we look a little bit at the structure of a plugin, the various files and the things that are in there. And then we will jump into the terminal and see how to run this stuff and what you can do with it. Okay, as I said, we basically provide these example projects that constitute plugins that you can look at, that you can use, that you can fork and copy, and basically use as a starting point. There's also some documentation for it. Here are links there. We also have the links at the end of the presentation. We will populate them after the tutorial so that you can actually go to these kind of documentations. And in the documentation, all the stuff that I'm talking about here is already described step by step, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so this is what the example projects look like. And in this case, it's the example for a schema plugin. These are the files in there. So it's basically one project and a couple of files. It's not that much, right? It's basically the typical stuff. There's a README with some instructions how to get started with it. There's a license file. Yeah, so we provide these examples under the Apache 2 license, like all the Nomad stuff. Of course, you can feel to change it and use whatever license you want. And then there are a few technical files necessary. We will see what these do during during the demo. And then the actual plugin itself is a Python package. In this case, we call it Nomad schema example. And in this Python package, we have an almost empty init py, and then we have the actual schema py, which contains the schema. And then we have another file called nomad plugin.yaml. And this is where we have the plugin metadata, right? And this is what comprises the plugin. You have the plugin code here, and then you have the plugin metadata in the YAML file. What the plugin metadata is, we will see in a second. And then we have a test package here with some example data and a few, well, very small test case, so that you are not only get started on developing the plugin, but you get also started on how to test the plugin and how you can add automated tests to it and so on and so forth. Okay, let's have a look at some of the files. The one important one is the Nomad plugin YAML, which contains the metadata of your plugin. And for schema, this is quite simple. We basically just say this plugin is of type schema, so it's a schema plugin. And later on, we will see the other plugin type that we currently have, the parser plugin. And then your schema gets a human name, something that is readable, that we can use to communicate what your plugin is, and then a description where you can say a little bit more about the plugin. Otherwise, everything else about the schema is the schema itself, right? So this is then the plugin code. Here is the schema py file. And here in our very small Hello World example, there isn't much in there. We basically just create one section. We define two quantities. The quantities are of type string. So there's a name quantity and there's a message quantity. They're both strings. The name quantity has this annotation added to it, right? These annotations, remember, these are necessary to turn your schema into an ELN, because this is what informs the UI to create certain form fields and stuff like this. So in this case, for the name quantity, we say we want to see an input field where people can enter their name. And then we have an example for a normalized function. And what the normalized function is doing, it basically, if you look at the last line here, it basically assigns a value to the message quantity, like this one here. And we basically say, okay, the message is hello, and then the name that is in the schema. And you can imagine when you run this in an ELN, what we want to see is that people enter their names, and then the message is created automatically from the name. It's just a very basic Hello World example, but it hopefully shows you the potential that with the Python schemas, you can basically take some of the inputs that the users provide you and then create more data out of this input. Yeah, that's it. That's basically what makes the plugin, right? And if you want to develop a plugin yourself, you can basically take this project, fork it, clone it to your machine, and start adding stuff to the schema. Yeah, then the next step at some point is then actually running the plugin or testing the plugin. Like both things are pretty important. In order to do this, you need some Nomad libraries. You have seen in the plugin there's this requirement.txt. This is basically where you can install the Nomad Lab Python package to your Python environment. And then from this package, you get, for example, the Nomad command, and with the Nomad command, you can run parsers and all these kinds of things. And this you can use to test your stuff locally, right? So so you basically install the Nomad Lab package, and then you get, with the Nomad Lab package, you can get the Nomad command line tool, and with this you can run a parser, for example. Or you could parse some piece of data and test whether your schema works with this data. In order to make this work, your Python code needs to be added to the Python parse. So you need to add, for example, your local directory to the Python parse, and then you can use the Nomad command, and the Nomad command will then know about your schema code. What it does not yet know is that the schema exists and what the schema metadata is, and therefore we have to do some configuration in the Nomad YAML file. Those of you that have run an Oasis, for example, before know about the Nomad YAML file, but it's our main config file that basically tells Nomad everything. And in this Nomad YAML file, we can now declare that we have certain schemas. Here's an example what a Nomad file might look like. You see we have then the plugin keyword here, and then with this plugin keyword we can say that we have a certain plugin, and this options list can be as long as you want. There are also certain plugins that already come with Nomad that are already in the options list, right? So when you define something like this in your Nomad YAML, you're basically adding, you're declaring new plugins to the system. So here, for example, we have a plugin, like one unique identifier that we need. The convention is to call it the plugin type / and then some short form of the plugin name. So we have the schemas example here, and then we say where the plugin can be found, and we basically just give the Python package in which the plugin lives. So when Nomad is run, the package is already in your Python path, and then it can use the respective Python things to find the package, and then it will look into the package and try to find the Nomad YAML metadata file, and then it knows everything that it needs to know about the example, about the plugin. And then we have this include options. There's an opposite one, the exclude option, that you can use to define a list of plugins that you want to have enabled or not have enabled. Yeah, and then this is everything that you need to actually run the plugin. So let me jump into presentation mode now, or into demonstration mode now. So I need to leave the comfort of my browser and head into the wilderness of my shell. Let me try to find the right desktop to share. So I already mentioned we have this. This is how you would do it, right? We have. I hope you see the right thing. Does everybody see a browser with some Nomad documentation in it? Okay. So this is what you would do, right? After the tutorial, you get a link to our documentation, and everything that I've explained so far you can find here in written form. You can see the stuff from the slides already, and you can basically follow these instructions. And here you would also find a link to our example projects. For example, the schema plugin one that we just looked at. It's basically a GitHub project. And then if you look at the files here, you see it's the structure that I just showed, right? The metadata file and the code file and so on and so forth. And then, of course, you can take this project. You can fork it, right? You can press the fork button here to basically create a copy in your own account, and then you can clone your fork to your local machine. And this is what I have prepared here already. So I basically have a workspace here where I cloned the parser example, the schema example, and then I also downloaded some Oasis configuration that we can also then later look at, which will be good to actually see the plugin in action. So, but let's stick with the schema plugin for now. Yeah, I already showed you the plugin code and stuff like this, right? So this is what we saw on the slide. So now the question is, what do you need to do to actually run this? Let me head to my terminal here. So now I'm here in the schema plugin example thingy. And basically what you need to do is what you always do when you do some Python projects, right? You create a virtual environment first. I already created this one. Let me just activate it. So now I am in my virtual environment, and then you need to install the Nomad Lab package, right? And for this we prepared the requirements txt. Let me see. Let me show it to you, right? So there's a small requirement txt. It only contains one package at the moment, which is the this one here, the Nomad Lab package. So that's all that you need in order to run the stuff that you see here. The only other addition is PyTest, which you need when you want to run the test cases, right? Well, there's only these two dependencies. It looks small, but the Nomad Lab package in itself has like tons of dependencies that are then pouring in later on. At the moment, all the plugin stuff that we show here is still kind of in a beta phase, so we don't have it in our official plugin. It's more or less a pre-release. So when you want to pip install it, you have to use this additional registry here, which basically gives you access to the versions of Nomad Lab that are still only on our server and not yet published to PyPy. But if you're familiar with our package, you probably already knew this because all the latest functionality is always hidden in this kind of thing. You can also find all these instructions that I'm just giving you verbally in the README file here. So there's this README file coming with the project. Let's look at it in its final render. And here you see how you can clone the stuff, right? And then so on, how to create a Python environment and everything in greater detail. So this is now the install command that I need to run. So let me run this. Yeah, I already run this before the presentation to keep it a little bit quicker. When you run this for the first time, it might take a little bit longer to actually install all these kind of things that are shown here. So, but now I have everything that I need to get started and use the plugin, right? So the one thing I told you, you need to add your plugin to the Python path. So let's just add the current directory to the Python path so that all the packages in this directory, including the one for the Nomad schema example, can be found by Python. And then I can use the normal command to actually run a parser, right? But what does it help to run a parser when I want to test the schema? Well, the idea is that you can provide an example file that your schema is supposed to adhere to, and then running the parser on it will basically make Nomad take your example file and instantiate the schema with it. So maybe let's have a look at this file. So in the test cases, we have, in both projects, we have the test cases have some data in it, and here we have a small archive file which contains some data for the schema that we have. You remember in the schema we just defined this one section here, so we're instantiating this section, and then there was this quantity name in it, and here we provide the value Markus, and then what's supposed to happen is that we instantiate the schema from this. The normalize function is supposed to be run, and then we should also see a message, right? So this is what our little hello world thingy is doing here. So if I go back here and I run the command, let me copy it from the README. It's probably safer than trying to type it myself. Now you can run the parse command, which looks like this. We basically say nomad parse, then we say the file that we want to parse. And then this here shows me that I want to see the resulting archive of the parsing process. So let's hit enter and then see if something is happening. Yeah, so now here we see the result. It contains all kinds of technical stuff. There's more metadata that we generate during the parsing, but the important stuff is on the very top. Here you see let me use less to show this better. Now I have to use less in the right way. What I'm doing wrong.
It's archive queue, Markus.
Yeah.
It is, okay. Yeah, on the very top, you see the data section. And now it's just not just the name, it's also the message, right? So the normalize function was run as part of the process. And we can see now that the message is hello world. And when you want to test your schemas properly, and then you want to automatize this process, you can use like these PyTests here, where we have a simple test case in there, where we basically say, we pass this test file, right? And then we assert that the message is indeed hello Markus, right? The thing that we want to have from our schema. Yeah, and using this as a starting point, you can go ahead and modify your schema and do all kinds of stuff. And for the parser, it works in a very, very similar way. I don't want to spend that much time on the parser, just give you the brief basics. Let's have a look at the parser code. And here we say, okay, we have a simple parser class. Everything that, or the only thing that the parser class needs to provide is this parse function here with a certain interface. And then what we are doing here is we are getting a file that we are supposed to parse, and we get an archive that we are supposed to fill with the data that we find in the parser. Yeah. And as part of the parser, we can also add more schema stuff. And here on top, you see some piece of schema. So we define an example section with a quantity called pattern in there, and this pattern quantity can be a something by 3 matrix of float numbers. And this is what our parser is doing here. It's opening a file, reading some lines, converting the lines, the numbers in the lines into something that can be turned into a matrix of floating point numbers. So if you're wondering for what this is good for, let's have a look at the example file for this. It's basically something like this. So what the parser is supposed to do is skip the first line and then take these numbers and put them into the quantity that we have that we have in the schema here. But then the way you run it is exactly the same as you saw before. You can use the Nomad command to actually run it and look at the results, or you can use the test cases. The test case here, which shows you how to automatize running a parser, and then you can assert whether the pattern looks the way that it's supposed to look like, and so on. Yeah, I hope you get the idea behind this. And again, everything is like documented in the READMEs here and also in our documentation. And the last thing I wanted to show is what happens if you run this in an Oasis, or if you want to run this in an Oasis. So I prepared also something for this. So let's first have a look at this directory here, the Nomad Oasis with plugin stuff. If you have ever gone through our Oasis documentation, then you know that we provide these zip files which contain all the configuration artifacts that are necessary that you can then just simply extract and then use Docker to run. And we provide a very similar thing where we already installed basically the two plugin examples here. And what it basically looks like, it has the volumes folder that you would also find in the normal Oasis. It has the config folder with the normal Oasis configuration that you might already know. The only additional stuff that we have now is these two, the two example projects. So it's basically just a cloned version of these two examples. And then we have the Docker Compose, which is exactly the same as that we use for the Oasis. And then you have an additional Docker Compose that contains additional stuff that is necessary to add the plugins to the system. And as you might already guess, our plugins are just Python code, right? So the only thing that is necessary is to get the Python code somehow into the Oasis and tell the Python environment about them. And what we basically do here is we take these two example projects and we just mount them into the container that need to know about them, right? So Nomad is run in two services: the app, which runs the API and the UI and everything, and then there's the worker service, which is supposed to do all the processing. And into both of these containers, we basically mount our directories here. And then the image is configured in a way that this directory, the app plugins directory, is already in the Python path. So if we add stuff like this in there, we basically expose the plugins to the Python environment of the Oasis. And yeah, and then our Oasis will basically have the plugins inside and will be able to run them. And from the Oasis side, it will then look like this. So here, this is my Oasis. And then when I create some new data, so let's say I want to try out these plugins, let's say I want to first test the schema. Then besides all the built-in schemas that we have, we should also now find the new schema. Let me see, it's on the other here somewhere there. This is my example section. This is what we defined in the plugin, right? And then I can say, okay, let's create an entry from this. And here we will find the name field, right, where we had this annotation to create this input field, and then I can enter my name, for example. And then if you're familiar with ELN, every time we save, right, the ELN data is sent to Nomad and the processing is run. So this is the point where we will basically execute our plugin, right, where the schema is getting instantiated, the normalize function is called, and then as a result, we see the message here. And very similar, it works for the parser. So we added this new parser. So now if I add the example file here, that's the example file with the pattern in there. If I upload the example file, then the parser plugin is basically run, and we basically get the result of the parsing here. And we see that the pattern was actually translated into the Nomad structure, into this pattern quantity, and here we see the numbers from the input file. Okay, that's basically it. Let me jump back to my presentation. And I think this also brings me to the end of my presentation. And we can answer some questions. How do I get back to this? Give me 1 second. Switching all these windows is harder than you think. Okay, now you should see the slides again. Yeah, I think that this is all what I wanted to show. Again, you can read about this in our documentation. Be aware at the moment it's still in beta, so you won't find it on our official Nomad. You will only find it on the staging Nomad. And this is the link where you can get to the documentation. And in there, you have a plugin section that explains everything that I just told you. And in the next presentations, you will see some more reasonable examples of actual schemas and parsers. And then again, we will try to publish everything after the tutorial so that you can actually try this out. This is a little bit the idea that we have with this tutorial. We want to give you this plugin mechanism and see what you are doing with it. And then in the last presentation, I will try to give this outlook and tell you a little bit where we want to go with this in the future.